Okay, looks we have people. This is Alec Clark. Looks like we have people joining. Let me just see who we have and who we're missing. First, make sure that I have all board members. We're just missing one board member so far. Let's see, we have Victoria and Rosemary and Sue. I see Brian, Paul, Ed Stickles, Eve, John McCabe, Jennifer Johnson, Kyle, Paul Garofano, Joe. Oh yeah, I already said Joe. And I see one dial in. Somebody whose number starts with 914713. But, all right, let me just make sure that the video feed is working. The video feed is working, so so that's going fine. So come back to here. All right, no, I'm sorry, I got one message here. Oh, okay. Let me just check with one more board member, and then we will get going. Okay, I think we are ready to get going here. So I guess welcome everyone in the public to the April 14th, 2020 meeting of the Edgemont Board of Education. Do I have a motion to bring us out of exec into public session? I have Monica, seconded by John at 8:03. Okay, so our first order of business. So first of all, again, those of you who are joining us on our newly created YouTube channel, welcome, thank you. Will not promise you that there won't be some blips. I'm pretty sure there will be, but please bear with us as we try to do a little better job of this each time. With that, our first order of business is to approve the March 24th minutes. I believe, Nilesh, were you gone on for that one? I'm just trying to confirm. Sorry, Nilesh, were you, was that the meeting that you were? Having trouble. Sorry, Nilesh, is that the meeting you were absent?
Yeah, I was absent.
Okay, so if I could have a motion to approve. I have Judy, second Marakita. All in favor? Okay, looks like we are unanimous with Nilesh having to abstain because he was not here for that meeting. Next up, is to approve the March 31st minutes. Could I have a motion to approve? Marakita, seconded by Monica. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Thank you all. We do not have a treasurer's report. On recognition of community, for the email that was, well, the link that all of you who joined from the public, on there was a link to a form by which you can submit questions. That form has now been opened, so you can click on that link and you can go in and submit your question. As I said in the document, the sort of the basic rules, if you will, are that as we would in a public meeting, we'd like you to, put your name in so we know who's asking the question. I'm going to wait until after the presentations to start, going through the questions. We'll see how it's going to determine how much time. Hopefully, if there aren't a huge number of questions, we will, go through all of them. If it looks like it's going to take a long time, I may cut it off at a certain point, but any questions that we do not answer during the meeting, as long as you've left your contact information on the question, we will follow up in the next day or two with answers to your questions. So with that, we now move on to the superintendent's report. Victoria. Oh, sorry, Pamela, did you have a question first?
No.
No? Okay. Did see your hand raised, so that's working. All right.
That was to approve the minutes.
Perfect. Okay, well that is working. So your hand raising, so all good.
Hi everyone.
Okay,
I just wanted to start with setting some context before I turn it over to Sue Shirkin to give an update on the budget and start a conversation, and also to I'll be turning it over to Michael Curtin. But I was just thinking about us sitting here at our computers and the fact that life as we once knew it is now over, and that this new life is a number of things. I'm sure we could all fill in the blanks, but it's different and difficult. Our boundaries are gone, day, night, weekday, weekend, holidays. It's all very different, and it's been such a shift for all of us. We had goals, plans, we had schedules, high expectations, very high expectations, and now it's a feeling of never enough. You can't even get on a schedule to get food delivered to your home, right? It's very little resembles our old life, and we're all really working hard. It's learning the rhythm. What is the rhythm of this new life? The routine of our new reality, the round the clock. It's in many cases feels like a sci-fi situation we are all living. People home with young babies trying to work, others with sick parents, or people who themselves are sick. So our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone who is sick, and we hope they're well soon. Tonight, we will report on our work. We continue to review, reflect, retool, and improve. And first, I'd like to just give a big shout out to my administrative team. Talk about no boundaries and what they've been doing to move into and through and leading in this new reality. Team, you are demonstrating adaptive leadership every day as everything is new. I'd also like to thank the faculty and staff working hard in a whole new context. Also, thanks to the board president working in a whole new context and pulling us all together electronically and otherwise with humor every day. To the board members and to our parent partners, what you're going through, and their students. So I just can't thank everyone enough. Everyone is working so hard to make our collective work in this, our collective way as we work in this brave new world. At this point, we're actually still scheduled to return on April 30th, but we are not planning for that. We're planning for a longer closure, but we await how long that closure will be. I'm sure we are all watching that play out on the news, but we are planning for longer and planning instruction accordingly. This will include conversations about creative ways to celebrate our traditional spring milestones. It's important to keep these celebrations, to keep that spirit alive, including awards, moving up in graduation, and we're looking at creative ways to do that and working together. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan Shirkin for the budget update, and to Michael Curtin for the continuity of instruction update.
Okay, thank you. Victoria and I, it's hard to believe, Victoria and I presented a budget on March 4th, and we followed that up on March 10th with a workshop session where we and the administrators suggested a 4.79% budget to budget increase and a 3.96 tax rate increase. Since that time, it's only been 5 weeks, but our lives have been consumed with the coronavirus, schools have been shut down, and the economy has taken a real steep downturn. We think that as community partners, we need to take another look at our requests for next year. So far, this is what we know has happened. There has been a loss of state aid with anticipated additional cutbacks. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second, because I listened to a webinar today. But our state aid, in spite of a $65,000 federal pandemic award, is down $90,000 for next year. Listening to the webinar this afternoon, we were informed that there's probably going to be another state aid cut in April. It's very possible there'll be another one between May 1st and June 30th, and possibly a third between July 1st and December 31st. We have no idea if they will happen or what kind of money they will cut back from us. Let me see. All right. There's also another cut in state aid, and that comes from special ed. It isn't in aid, but it's in an expense that they have always paid, which was the state always paid a portion to us of our residential placements. They paid about 18%, the district paid 30%, and then we received money from the county also. Well, today and in the budget adoption, we learned that the state is no longer going to pay that 18% and change of the cost of residential placements. So the entire, it's about 56% total now that the district will be paying instead of about 34% or 32%. I also learned that our foundation aid, which is the real part of our aid that is not expense-based, will not go up at all, and that it is probably going to go back to an 1819 level of aid for foundation aid, and that is the biggest portion of our aid. So we are looking at reductions in response to the changes in this loss of aid. We are still waiting for a budget timeline, and there hasn't been a date set for the budget vote. And once you know a date, the budget vote, everything works backwards. We have to have a budget hearing, and that has to be between 7 and 10 days of the budget vote. Not knowing when the budget vote is, we cannot set a meeting for the budget hearing. There are ads to be placed in the newspaper. We've already placed 2 out of the 4, which have to be in the newspaper within 30 days of the budget vote. I'm guessing we're going to have to replace those ads in the newspaper again. There's obviously a lot that we still don't know. I've talked about transportation and how the bid came in so high, and that is still unresolved. We have until the end of April to accept the bid, and I am still working with those in Ardsley to join their consortium. While they've said yes to us joining, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in putting that all into place. And we do know of 5 retirements that we didn't know about when the first budget was presented. We have 3 members of the clerical unit and 2 members of the teaching staff that have put in their retirement papers for this year. So the numbers are fluctuating daily, almost, and there are still a lot of unknowns at this time. I think that these changes are forcing us to take another look. We do understand the financial difficulties, and we will be hopefully reducing the budget in a manner that impacts students as little as possible. Hopefully, we will continue to maintain the quality of an Edgemont education, and yet it's important that this budget positions us well still for the future. So I am looking to the board for some discussion and direction, if you will, at this point in time.
Before I
Okay.
join in, does anyone on the board have questions or comments they'd like to make to Sue at this point? Judy.
Hi, Sue, thank you very much for that recap. It's very helpful. Just a question about the budget hearing taking place 7 to 10 days before the vote. I thought I had read somewhere that that requirement was waived. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily have to do that, but did I misunderstand that, or?
What I heard today was that the public hearings may be postponed till June 1st. And if that happens, then the budget vote wouldn't happen until at least 7 days after that. But that's
Okay,
what,
so that's
what I heard today.
Got it. I appreciate that update. And the ads that we've placed in the newspapers, those have to be rerun because it's not within the realm of state law
Right.
requirement being met because it's outside of the 30 days. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. And they're not sure if that's going to be waived or not.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have other questions or things to Marquita?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific question. I know that, there's ongoing work to look at these specific areas of the budget where there is space for some discretion. I also know that there's very few of those. And so I appreciate you both keeping on top with some of these changes and then also kind of really figuring out what the implications are for, what we can and can't do. I think that, I think it's important for everybody to know that the Budget and Finance Committee and the whole board is participating in those conversations as appropriate as you go through this. And I think so far I really have felt very comfortable with the way that we've been thinking about it and our ability to kind of find some space for fiscal management. Not in ways that show excess, but in ways that have shown that we can wait for some of the things that we know are important, but need to be delayed because of these financial times. So I appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm happy to continue to work on figuring out space for that.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the board like to say anything? While I'm waiting to see if anyone else does, I'd like to say, thank you for the work you've been doing and are doing. I think as Marquita, what you said, Marquita said, we know when we put this budget out there before, there was no fluff in there. There were
Right.
we've always tried to be very fiscally responsible. But having said that, as Marquise said, maybe there's some things that could be pushed back some. Anything we do is going to have some impact, but right, the further we can keep that impact away from sort of the direct instruction of the students, the better. I think also, to the extent we can try to find maybe a number of areas where each one we can, shave a small amount, may, lessen the impact of any one change, so they're not all concentrated in one area. So if we needed to decided we needed to save a certain amount of money, instead of getting rid of extracurriculars, maybe you take 10% of that amount out of 10 areas as an example. So I think that's the sort of things we're hoping that you can help us with, so that yes, we can be cognizant of the financial situation that we know our community is in right now, while, as you said, trying not to sacrifice anything significant in the quality of the education that we give our students. Anyone else on the board that would like to either make a comment or ask anything of Sue at this point? Okay, then I think with that we can, I guess are we turning it over to Mike now, Victoria?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Curtin, you're on.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. So tonight I wanted to give the board and the community an update on our continuity of instruction program that has been our response to the coronavirus situation. And I would tend to characterize our response in terms of providing instruction for kids during this time as having three phases. In the first phase, we really had to rush to get everything together. Suddenly, it seemed like we were going to be closed for a brief period. The initial period was about 2 weeks. And we tried to assemble some primarily material that would be review, reinforcement, and enrichment. That was easy to get to kids. We had a lot of technological hurdles to overcome. So primarily during phase one, the expectation was we'd be back in school soon. We would give the students some work to keep them sharp, to keep them, to kind of keep them learning, to keep them engaged. And primarily that was accomplished through assignments posted on Google Classroom or via email. We then, through monitoring feedback from parents, from students, from teachers, we recognized that there was a real need among kids and families and teachers for some level of connection beyond just email and submitting work. Especially, we were hearing a lot of, like, I get these assignments each day, and if I'm confused, I have to wait to hear back from the teacher via email. Most teachers have been, checking email not only daily, but practically hourly, but still things happen and messages get crossed. The teacher would answer a question and the student would have a follow-up question. It's just too much to support through email alone. And also we recognize that students really need opportunities to interact with other living, breathing people. And so we adapted our approach about 2 weeks ago to include what we've come to call teacher time at the elementary schools and office hours at EHS. And now we're starting to think about phase 3, which is based upon the assumption that we're not going back physically to school this year, and that we have to get kids through the year with new content that they haven't encountered before, and to give them some active instruction in the sort of core curricular concepts in each class and each grade level to make sure they're ready for next year. And so now we're looking at some adding in terms of methods, some more interactive options, including real-time instruction, where a teacher is communicating in real time and teaching students as opposed to sort of just supporting them, which is the office hours and teacher time model. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so the last time we gave an update to the board on our continuity of instruction was on March 24th. And since then, as I mentioned, we've implemented live teacher time in the elementary schools, which happens 2 times per week minimum, and office hours at EHS, which happens on a daily basis. We've also spent a lot of time, in particular at EHS, thinking about what grading and assessment should look like for the fourth quarter and the year, and the third quarter actually as well. And Kyle and his team have worked really hard to come up with a fair system for calculating a course grade for the students at the end of the year based upon their work, both online and in person. And so far, we've gotten pretty good feedback on that. We were suddenly kind of faced with, a lot of us had assumed we'd be off for part or all of last week, and suddenly Governor Cuomo the week before announced that we wouldn't be. And so we had a number of issues surrounding that we had to work through. We have been engaging in ongoing data collection. We have over 400 submissions by parents, probably when you include in then students, probably about 500 submissions from students and parents on the form that we posted, where they can give us feedback on what's working, what questions they have. And we have been taking that feedback very seriously, and trying to identify the big pressure points and to move forward on them. And then also last week, as we contemplated moving forward in our program, we sent a check-in survey to the teachers, where we asked them sort of to get a better sense of what they're doing, what challenges they're facing, where they think they need professional learning, and so forth. We are continuing to offer professional learning experiences for teachers, both on the technology side and on the pedagogy side, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. We've also started to think in terms of what sort of a leading voice in education, Heidi Hayes Jacobs, has called curriculum triage. It's unrealistic given all of the disruption, given the fact that some students have different home situations, are struggling with sick family members, they may be sick themselves. Given that, sorry, excuse me, Will, I'm sorry, sorry, that's my 8-year-old just coming in for a visit. So curriculum triage, it's unrealistic to expect us to get through the same curriculum we would in a regular school year. We have to really figure out what are the really high leverage teaching points in each class that we need to cover to make sure kids are ready. So the teachers have been asked to start thinking about what the remainder of the year looks like in terms of achieving the most important goals in their curricula. Recognizing that as we move to office hours, teacher time, real-time instruction, we updated the district privacy policy to make sure that everything was watertight in terms of the challenges that are posed by online teaching. And we've then, for the last week or so, been working on what phase 3 will look like. Excuse me for 1 second. Sorry.
Did you lock the door?
I'm sorry?
Did you lock the door?
Yeah, no. I just put a desk and a chair and a safe in front of it. So some of the important things that we've learned, much of these 3 things come from really speaking with teachers and through the survey that we did. A lot of teachers report that sort of their own accord, they are already providing instruction on new content. They've already started to move forward. About 20% of them indicated that they are doing that via live instruction, synchronously online with their students. Right now, that's voluntary, although under the new model that's coming soon, every teacher will be responsible for delivering some amount of real-time instruction to their students. Second sort of big learning is that the teachers are concerned that many students have risen to the challenge of learning online. They are doing what they've been asked. There's a group that are not engaged, that are not turning in work, that they're viewing it as, well, school is optional. It's not optional. We're doing our best through policy, through, redesigning the learning experiences to re-engage those students. But that's been probably the biggest challenge for our teachers, is the fact that some kids are just not showing up virtually. And so we are definitely working to address that. And then finally, teachers have done a remarkable job in learning to use new tools to access online materials, to connect with their students. Many of them, if I had said the words Google Meet to a teacher 6 months ago, most of them would have given me a blank stare. And now I'd say 95 to 100% of them are, at least proficient, and in many cases advanced proficient in their use of that tool and others. So we've made remarkable progress there. What they're really struggling with right now is the pedagogy, because I've gotten feedback from families that said, well, the teachers already have their lessons. Why can't they just deliver them online? Why can't they just take video of themselves? And that's not a successful strategy in many cases. That assessment looks different, engagement looks different. Everything they learned about teaching, they have to kind of relearn to teach in this new medium. And they are doing an admirable job of that, but I think it's a much more difficult task than simply learning how to use Screencastify or something. So those are three sort of important ideas that I wanted the board and the community to be aware of. Finally, as I mentioned, we are working on phase 3. Okay, and at the bedrock of phase 3 is that the teachers are delivering new content, and that doesn't mean they're lecturing necessarily, but they are focusing their instruction on kids learning the portions of the curriculum that they haven't already learned this year. And they're using an array of different tools and methods, including real-time instruction. Curriculum triage, I talked about that already a little bit. That we are working, this is sort of right where we are today. We spent a lot of time today working on the structures and the schedules that would be able to support student learning needs, family schedules, providing the teachers with flexibility and support. It's very hard to make this work when everyone's working at home and kids are competing for devices, and kids are trying to schedule themselves into different structures. So we are working hard on that right now. We will continue to work on professional development for the teachers and collaborating with the teachers. And finally, some of the feedback that we've gotten recently has been that the parents feel a little overwhelmed by the number of emails and all the information. We are really focused on getting information out to families as quickly as possible, but there is an awful lot of information, and it changes frequently. We're doing our best. But one of the things that I know Paul Garofano is working on, and some of the other administrators, is really centralizing everything, building a sort of archive, a one-stop shop where families can go to get answers and to review the communications that have gone out. So those are the things that we're working on. I think at this point, I will stop and say thank you, and then turn it back to Alec, who can, I guess, open the question and answer phase. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Let me just start by echoing Victoria's earlier comments. I just am in awe of what you all have accomplished under these incredibly impossible conditions. I know, I'm having the, behind the scenes look at what's going on every day. I know how hard everybody is working and how, incredibly productive you're actually working, managing to be in this most difficult of situations. And you've done a nice job, I think, of, communicating some of those difficulties. I mean, I know, when we're sitting out in the community, when I go through my walks through the neighborhood and talk to people, there's been some frustration in terms of the pace of things, but it's one of those things where it's until you actually see it and are sort of living through it, it's I mean, you've scratched the surface in terms of all the things that have had to have been done to get us to the point where we are today. I mean, I sort of made the analogy to someone that for me to truly get her to understand why we were where we were at that point of time, it would take a 4-hour explanation. And during that time, 5 things would have changed that would have meant we had to shift and adapt. So again, kudos to all of you. I know we are a very long way from being done, but very much appreciate everything that everyone is having to do, because this is clearly an all hands on deck kind of effort. So with that, I see that Judy has her hand raised, so I will turn it over to Judy for now.
Hi, sorry about that. It took me longer to unmute than I thought. So first of all, I echo what Alec has said in terms of thanks to both Mike and to Sue as well. It's enormously helpful just to hear how much thought is going into all the challenges that you are all facing and grappling with and working to try to accommodate all of the varying needs that our students and families have. And so thank you, everybody, for all of what you have done thus far and are continuing to do. This question actually goes back to Sue's presentation. Jennifer DeMarais was trying to submit a question. So she gets the credit for this. If we end up making cuts to next year's budget due to the cuts in state aid, does that amount become the new baseline for subsequent budgets? And she's thinking of the tax cap issue.
Probably. The state is talking about the changes they're making as a new baseline for us for the state aid. That's what your question is. I know that I heard that today, that by cutting back state aid, that will be a new floor, if you will. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not certain, but I think that what I understood the question to be is, so if we shrink our budget, does that limit what we can do the following year by necessity because we're working off of a smaller baseline?
It does for the cap.
Okay.
Okay. And yes, it does for the cap. To bring the budget down this year, our original budget was right at the cap. Whatever the cap dollars allowed us to ask for, we did. Now to cut back and to make the tax rate a little lower, I have to bring taxes down. And yes, that will be the floor for next year, the lower number. So if we take, let's just pick a number. I don't have it tonight, but let's pick a number. If we were to cut back that tax rate, that tax dollar number, $500,000, next year we're going to start with a base that's $500,000 less, and whatever the growth rate would go on top of that lower number.
Has there been any discussion that you know of with the state about the possibility of somehow granting
I
a
haven't
waiver
heard
for
a
next
thing.
year, or?
Right. I have not heard a thing. And I told you I was on a webinar today, which I thought was pretty informative.
Okay.
They did not even mention the tax cap. So
When
wasn't
you
even
have the
brought
next
up.
time, all right, well, when you have the next opportunity, is this a question that can be asked?
I can ask. I'm today, I would say they probably don't have an answer to that question, or else they probably would have brought it up. But I will tune in, and if there's an opportunity to ask that type of a question, I definitely will. But yeah,
Terrific. That's all I can ask. Thank you.
okay.
Next up is Nilesh.
He's muted, I think.
Yeah. Unless you want me to unmute you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead,
Thank you.
Nilesh.
Yeah. So this question is for Mike. Hi, Mike. So first of all, thanks a lot for all the work that the administration and the teachers are doing. The only line that caught my attention, it's a little concerning to me, is that you mentioned that some of the students are not engaging in the current process. And I wonder, how much effort that we could put in, because we don't want to land up in a situation next year when we have a very large pool of students who are, trailing to cope up with the next year curriculum. And I completely understand. I just want to leave that thought because that was a line that caught my attention. And, I just feel a little worried on those students who are not engaging currently. And if something can be done in a very quick manner, because we are already in April and it's only maybe 2 months left. So I just want to put in an urgency on that line that you mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nilesh. Yeah, it is concerning in instances. So at this point, the district strongly recommends, but does not require, that students attend office hours. We can't really, because we've given the teachers latitude in terms of when they schedule them, which means that then there's conflicts. So that's why we're looking very hard right now as we move to the next phase, where we're delivering content at structures that will support kids being able to access their teachers, because now the stakes are raised in the sense that that there's new content to be learned. And so I think the fact that there is new content to be learned now will in and of itself engage kids and lead them to think like, oh, okay, this is school. I need to be there. I think that once we have structures that feel more like a schedule, where kids have a little bit more accountability and a little bit greater access to be able to access their teachers, that will help. But I do want to assure you that right now, anytime we have an issue with a student who's not, who's consistently not showing up or not turning in work, teachers have been instructed to reach out to the parents. If there's no response, then they, get the building administrators involved, and the building administrators are reaching out to the parents. We're troubleshooting those issues. The counselors, the psychologists, it's been a great team effort in terms of, really trying to pull kids in. And I feel like we're making progress, but it is still concerning. There are some kids who just, a big part of school is seeing their friends, being with their friends, being with their teachers. And this just doesn't feel the same. And so we're really working hard to re-engage those students and kind of bring them back in.
No, thanks a lot. I'm completely supportive of and appreciative of whatever work you're doing. So, but thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for clarification.
All right,
Yep.
Before I get to the next board question, I think Joe maybe wanted to weigh in on that question. Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Mike was saying and to let you all know that I hear frequently from the counselors when there's a student who may not be handing in work and they're monitoring things. So the teachers this is at the high school level, teachers are definitely getting to counselors, and then counselors are reporting it to administration. So our assistant principals are alerted to it, as well as our principal at the high school, and I'm alerted in certain instances as well. So we are trying to follow up, is my point. But you know, when there's a group of kids, you know, that may be sort of off track, we're doing the best we can to really get them back on track. And I do know that efforts are made to reach out to parents as well.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, I believe we have a question from Marquita.
Yeah, my question is, you know, this is uncharted territory for a lot of people, and in uncharted territory, some people are better equipped than others to kind of take the bull by the horns. And so I'm sure there's some people out there, as you noted, Mike, who are already kind of moving forward. My question is really around best practices and sharing across the district. And so I'm wondering what's being done just in terms of people being able to share the things they're doing, the things that are being successful, that are succeeding, kind of getting children engaged. And I know we've got a ton of parental feedback around ways that the teachers are engaging that have been particularly successful and appreciated. So just wondering how we're sharing best practices and approaches that might be useful to other teachers as well.
Yeah, thanks. So the teachers are meeting more frequently than they typically would. They are touching base by grade level, by department, at least weekly. The building faculty meetings are happening more frequently as well. And obviously, a lot of the focus at those meetings has been, instruction, which is great. And tomorrow, one of the big sticking points is assessment, really figuring out how to assess kids in this environment. So when that was one of the things that I learned a lot about through the teacher survey last week, that people are concerned about that. So Andrea Nash and I are actually convening a series of meetings tomorrow with teachers online to really talk about, we've sort of said there's two questions we want to ask at each of these meetings. One is, what are you doing that's working? And share what you're doing that's working, but then also, what do you need help with? And so we're hoping to kind of do that. And that's really, Andrea has been fantastic with troubleshooting people's tech issues, but she's also a very talented instructional designer. And so I think that now that we're past the, oh my God, how do I get my Chromebook to work phase, at least towards the end of that, she's starting, I think, to engage more, and we're all starting to engage more in like, okay, now that this is happening, now that we know it's going to continue to happen, what are the things that are going to work? But honestly, in some ways, it feels like the blind leading the blind. Very few people in the district have ever taught online, and so we are also hooking into what BOCES is offering in terms of professional learning, the Scarsdale Teachers Institute. I think all of this is helping us to kind of ramp up our own learning very quickly and to start to recognize what's working and what's not. Early on in the process, really early on, a math teacher, Rachel Golub, shared with me, I have at the end of each lesson, I'm asking kids to give me a feedback form saying, what worked for you, what didn't. She wrote a really beautiful email to the kids saying, look, I need help here, and help me help you, basically. And I shared that out to the rest of the teachers as something, that they might want to consider, and many of them did. So we're doing our best, I think. Teachers definitely have been very creative and willing to share what's working. And so, we can do more, but I think that we're in a pretty good place with staying connected to what's going on outside of Edgemont in terms of figuring this all out, as well as celebrating and sharing the best practices in Edgemont.
Thank you.
I think Victoria wanted to.
Well, yeah, wanted to, and then Mike started going the same direction I was thinking. So there you go. But I did want to say, Madhukita, that the best practices, I think this environment has actually made it easier to share best practices, because not only are teachers sharing outside of their classrooms and between and among schools, but with other districts in Westchester County, in other states and around the world. More of us have been jumping on webinars, interacting with people, top of their fields, and it's really been a great time to do that. I think that's been one of the silver linings in terms of best practices.
Great, thanks.
Monica, I think you had your hand up, and then I'll get to you, Eve.
Yes. One of the words that's kind of reverberating in my head is the word triage. And I want you to know I'm totally 100% mindful that is what you are doing, and that what we are really trying to do is educate our kids as best as we can. But the other thing that's bouncing around in my head is this is a very stressful for all of us. I don't know any adult who is not stressed in some way and acting out in some way in response to this incredible time we're in. And when I think about our social emotional emphasis that we always, talk about, and I hear about kids that just aren't showing up and aren't getting out of bed till 1 o'clock. I think part of it is they're kids, but part of it is how are they coping and how are they dealing with the stress? And so I would add a layer onto this you really don't want, but thinking about, for example, the drive-by parade that the Sealy School did, which is, I think, a great way to connect with those younger kids and give them that sense of community. And it wasn't about arithmetic. It was about connecting with those kids emotionally. And are there ways that we can do something so that the kids aren't falling through the cracks emotionally as well? And I know that's a tall order with everything else. But it just seems to me that it's something that we should think about.
Yeah, I agree. And we are thinking about it. And as I mentioned before, in cases where someone is really kind of pulling away, we do have teachers, administrators, counselors, and psychologists working to support those students very actively. But beyond that, I think we want to really take care of all kids, just kids who, are they're doing school, they're coming to school virtually. But we want to proactively make sure that they're feeling good, or at least not feeling horrible about all of this. And so things like the Sealy parade, I think that's very much on all of our radars to try to, make sure that kids are getting the information they need in this crisis and kind of being supported through it. So we were talking, for example, today about, we had done some summer curriculum work on really meeting the state's new mandate to teach mental health, which I guess was very timely. We decided to try to do that through the literature we teach in elementary school. And we were talking today about how we could kind of continue that work, because kids are particularly in need of that level of support right now. And so we're very much aware of that concern. We're concerned ourselves, and doing our best to address it.
Victoria, did you want to hop in on that?
No, thanks. Mike said it beautifully.
Okay.
Oh, my hand's raised. I have to unraise that.
I put it down. That's all right. Judy, go ahead.
This is a question from a parent on the YouTube channel, Lakshmi Girish. Is there a way for the students to get access to books from the school library?
So not physical access at this point, but there are a number of ebook collections that our libraries have access to ordinarily, and a number of other organizations have, in the light of this crisis, have opened their collections. So there's ebook access through organizations like Overdrive and Epic. And each of the libraries, I believe, has set up a web page that includes information on how to access those resources. And you can also reach out directly to the librarians who can help you get access to whatever resources you need. But they are definitely on it and have been working very hard to make sure that the resources are available online for kids to do research and to get their work done.
Okay, I have a question that was submitted through just our regular board email from Laura Wilker. She was wondering if, I mean, I know Victoria mentioned, right, that we've had probably in the neighborhood of 500 or more pieces of feedback between the parents and the students. Can you give some sort of general summarization of some of the themes that you've seen in that feedback?
It really, I mean, this goes back now 4 weeks.
Right.
So, it kind of follows an arc in terms of, like, so for example, when the high school initially announced its grading policies, there was a lot of feedback about that. Some of it was, what's the word I'm looking for here? Negative. But we've definitely tried to, as we move beyond third quarter, I think we've addressed a lot of those things. Honestly, a lot of the feedback in the beginning was, we want to see and hear the teachers. That was one of the drivers of office hours and teacher time. And again, a lot of the feedback from students and teachers has been, that they want to have live real-time instruction. And so that's been sort of predominant in those data. Also, a lot of positive comments about, we're so impressed with the dedication of the teachers. We know it's hard, and so when we initially rolled out office hours, there's a lot of positive feedback. So it kind of comes in waves depending on what we do. People go back to those forms and continue to submit their feedback. So, it has been very helpful. I know anytime I go into that document to look at the responses, I always see an A in the corner showing that Alec Clark is looking at them too. He probably sees an M. We are taking the feedback very seriously and doing our best to respond to it. And so those are, just off the top of my head, those were some of the themes that I've been hearing. A lot of people also talking about scheduling, and they're actually, it's interesting, Monica, to your point, a number of parents have also just talked about, supporting their kids' social emotional health and well-being. So a smattering, but I think those are the big ones right there, the big themes that I've seen. I don't know if Alec or any of the other administrators who've reviewed those data wanted to kind of fill in any others that they recall or that maybe I've mischaracterized.
No, I think that's a great characterization in terms of, the broad themes. I mean, they're probably a handful of one-off ones in there that we're not thinking of right now. But in terms of ones where, right, I've seen themes come through, I think you've covered them well.
Great.
Do we have any more questions or comments from the board? Judy.
Sorry, I just got a text from a parent in the community asking if quarter 4 grading has been discussed.
Yes. So students are going to receive, I assume the question is about EHS. Students.
Yes.
Yeah, so students are going to receive a traditional quarter 4 grade. It will comprise the work that they've done online with their teachers during fourth quarter, in addition to any grades that that the students received in the first part of third quarter while we were still physically in school. That was the negative feedback that we got when we announced that third quarter would be pass fail, was students and their parents who were saying, look, I was really doing well, and I want that to be recognized somehow. So essentially, we're creating we're sort of taking the first half of third quarter and smushing it in with fourth quarter, and essentially weighting them they're each weighted equally. So first quarter 33%, second quarter 33%, third/fourth quarter 33%. We sort of basically wind up with a trimester system. The one sort of piece of that is that one of the things that you see in a lot of the social media groups for teachers and administrators and the emerging sort of best practices is that in terms of assessment, the rule is do no harm, right? Like, these are extraordinary times. You want to recognize that kids are going through all kinds of things in their homes. And so towards that end, a kid's first and second quarter average cannot be brought down by that grade from third and fourth, from part of third and the rest of fourth quarter. So we're really, trying to support kids through that system. I think that I know some of the EHS administrators are online right now and can maybe add or correct anything that I've said. And I believe that Principal Hosier sent out some information about this, and that it's also available somewhere on the EHS website, but I'll leave it to them to kind of fill in any blanks. So thanks.
Yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
Great, Mike. I think you did an excellent job of summarizing the plan. I would just note one addition. So the do no harm model is true if a student passes Q3 and Q4, their quarter one, quarter two average of the grades cannot be lower than what that average is for the final grade that goes on the transcript. However, to try to keep kids engaged, we have said that if a student completely checks out and does no work, that if they receive a fail grade, that their grade could go down. So just a little more to try to keep kids engaged, knowing that they are concerned about their final grade that goes on the transcript. We've had a series of emails that went out. If you haven't seen them, if you go to the junior senior high school website on the lower right side, there's a tab that says messages from the administration. And that's our centralized location for all emails that have been sent out since this coronavirus situation has started. I would also note that we've had tomorrow at 4 p.m. will be the fourth parent meeting that we've had. We've met with over 100 parents. We've also held several meetings with students, have probably met with nearly 100 students, just to answer questions. It's very difficult to glean all the details in an email, and we think it's been helpful to answer questions, and we know we've learned from the conversations that we've had with parents and students.
Okay. There looks like we've got a couple questions that have come in through other sources. I've got one that's come in through the form. I will just say for anyone else who's submitting form, the spirit of this was to not make this anonymous. This one is anonymous, but I'm gonna pass it on anyway. The question is, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the question reads, is there a reason the junior high students only have 2 classes per day? I don't know who wants to take that one.
So I can start, and then anyone else can jump in. So we're not following a bell schedule, right? So it's not a matter of classes, and all of the classes are ongoing all of the time, but there is an emphasis with new material and with assignments being pushed out. So I'm wondering if that is what the question is, and I don't know if anyone wants to dive in with the specifics of the rotations.
Kyle, you want to go ahead?
So the schedule, which is shared with students and parents, it can also be found on our school's website under the calendar. If you look at it, you'll notice that Most days, students have 3 or 4 subjects that are assigned, and we've asked 7th and 8th grade teachers to assign approximately 45 minutes of work. We recognize that for some students that might take a half hour, and for other students it could take an hour and a half. So to think about how much time do we want students to be spending on this work, we think a couple hours in addition to office hours each day is probably a sweet spot. It's in line with what other schools around the county are doing. Some students are racing through it, and I think the issue isn't the amount of work. What we've heard from teachers is that the quality of work that they're receiving from students. If students took a little more time, that would be helpful. But it's not just 2 subjects. It's 3 to 4 subjects each day.
Okay, great. Judy.
So there are a bunch of questions that are being asked on the YouTube site. The first one is, how are we assessing that the kids are doing well, are doing good, that they are learning new material and meeting requirements? And then there's another question from another parent. That was from Noreen Jabor. And then there's a question from another parent.
Judy, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm not, part of the problem is I'm not sure I understood it. It says, how are we assessing that kids are doing, in quotes, good, that they are learning new material and meeting requirements? I don't know if she means well, but I think the question is, how are we letting, because there was another version of the question, how are we letting the kids know that they are succeeding at what is being asked of them? I think that's what the question is.
It really depends on the grade level. I would say what assessment looks like in 1st grade versus 6th grade versus 11th grade in this environment, or in any environment for that matter, is going to be very different. And so, and as I mentioned, teachers are having to learn a new way to teach, and perhaps the most difficult part of that is assessing kids. We assess kids every day when we're in the classroom. We're watching them, they're asking questions, we're giving exit tickets, we're assessing through homework. We have so many different tools as teachers that suddenly we don't have. And then the sort of traditional summative assessments, like tests, quizzes, projects are still on the board, but tests and quizzes, they're just not valid in an online environment. So assessment starts to look very different, and the type of assessments that are going to succeed tend to be more project-based, but they're also the hardest to implement correctly. So depending on the grade level of the students, we're working with the teachers. We are going to be working tomorrow and in the coming weeks to move them forward with assessment, but I think teachers are using a wide range of approaches right now, but all are focused on giving kids feedback on where they stand with their learning and where they need to go.
Okay. And then the other question is, what is this is from Daniel Wood. What is the plan going forward to offer students more instruction from the teachers? Is it possible for the students to have more than 2 subjects per day? My kids only have about 2 hours of work per day. As a working parent, it's very hard for me to come up with an educational plan for them that's appropriate, relevant, and will prepare them for next year. Thanks.
So if I could just jump in maybe before Mike jumps in also, it's the balance of, so online learning and students working at home is different than live instruction in the classroom, right? So we're continually balancing the appropriateness of that and trying to give students more opportunities to interact as first through office hour and now through the presentation of new content in a number of ways. But I think the way we're judging time looks very different, right? It's not going to be, I was on a call with parents today, and I said we went very quickly from parents being upset that the students had too much screen time, and we were working to make sure that students were doing a variety of learning activities. And now we're also trying to make sure that we're balancing what it is that we're asking students to do.
Yeah, and I would just add that certainly the structures that we're looking at now in terms of moving towards real-time instruction, I think they are not, no one thinks it's a good idea to reproduce a 9-period a day bell schedule with 40-minute classes. That would be disastrous in an online environment. And I think that schools and districts, the few that have tried that, are probably regretting it. And I know some of them are regretting it. It's just that's fighting the medium. That's trying to reproduce physical classrooms in an online environment. That's not going to work. So you really have to think critically about what works best for different age levels in an online environment. And I think that the answer is going to be some combination of real-time instruction and check-ins, probably not more than 20 or 25 minutes for a subject, for a quote-unquote lesson. And then other resources, the kids doing independent work, the kids perhaps viewing screencasts. There's so many different tools that teachers have been learning about and beginning to implement. And so it's not going to be a linear, full school day. It's just not going to look like that, because that's not an effective model in this paradigm. And at the same time, I can assure you that kids will have plenty to do with plenty of support and instruction from their teachers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to look through one of the questions here online, see. The question in terms of how are we communicating with students with how to improve, I believe the question is. And I guess that does, as you talked about in general, come down to assessments in whatever form they take, and if they're.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but certainly grades 3 through 12 are using Google Classroom. The Google tools really support collaboration and feedback in a positive way. Many teachers are using those tools to give kids feedback on their projects. They can do that through office hours. But it's a challenge when you think about like a model like Reading Workshop, where conferring is like baked right in, where the teacher sits with a kid for 10 minutes and says, "Tell me about the book you're reading. Who are the main characters? Tell me about that character. Show me a part in the text." Where that level of interaction that we so treasure and value becomes really challenging in an online environment, especially when there's just so many other things going on in the lives of our kids as well as our teachers. So, we are doing our best to work with the teachers to make sure kids get feedback in a timely manner, but it's a challenge. The teachers are working their butts off. And I think it's very hard for them to suddenly replace teaching and talking with typing and and videos. So they are working very hard at it, but it's a process.
There's a question here that I think you've already answered, but let me take a shot at it, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it was basically asking, how are we making sure that our kids are learning what they're supposed to the next year and be prepared to move on to next year? And that's, I believe, what you were talking about before, is trying to distill out of what would normally be in what the curriculum for the rest of the year, what are the most important pieces of that to put them in the best position to start off next year, hopefully, if not behind, at least not too far behind.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so we are engaging the teachers in that process that I called curriculum triage, where they are looking at what they've already worked on this year, and then what hasn't yet been covered, and in the what hasn't yet been covered, figuring out what are the most important things that the kids absolutely need to have to move on to the next school year. I know there have been some conversations, and I hope to support more of this, between grade levels, where certainly at EHS it's a little easier, where the teachers meet by department, and so they're having these conversations about, okay, well, if I'm teaching, global 2, what do I need to get my kids ready for American history next year? In the elementary schools, it's a little trickier, but we have talked about doing some cross grade level meetings so that the teachers can say to their colleagues in the grade above them, okay, look, what are the things that these kids need in September for them to, be on the right track? And so we're supporting those conversations, and we'll continue to do so.
Okay. There's one question here, which again, I think has been sort of alluded to, but maybe we can sort of point to it again. The question is, can teachers voice record the important and critical lessons instruction and send them out as an alternative to live lessons? And I understand some teachers, are basically doing that, right? That's the screencasts that they're putting out there, right? I mean, that is one of the array of options that teachers are having. And in some cases, they may choose that because, one, then it doesn't have to take place at a time, where they've had to coordinate their schedules. Also, for certain types of material, they can come back if the kid didn't get it the first time, they can come back and look at it again and review it, So I assume and it's going to be different teacher to teacher, but I presume for a lot of teachers that will be one piece of what they do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've said to people is that, some people look at synchronous instruction by itself as sort of the gold standard, and everything else is somehow inferior. And the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, the different modalities that we have at our disposal, whether it be live instruction or screencasts or recording yourself doing a lecture, whatever, they each have their pitfalls, they each have their promises and their benefits. And I think a mix of different approaches is what's going to be most successful. And what that mix looks like is going to be different from grade level to grade level, and even from teacher to teacher. But I think that the idea of using pre-recorded screencasts is helpful in households where you have kids competing to use a limited number of devices. So, my brother's going to go to his office hours at the same time that my class is meeting, but at least I know I can see, a recording of that class or whatever. So technically, we do have the ability to record the same way that this is probably being recorded. We have if a class meets live, we have the ability to record that and archive it. And certainly teachers are already creating screencasts and pre-recorded lectures, for lack of a better term. And so it's going to be a sort of a mix of content, both synchronous and asynchronous, that I think in the end is most helpful in terms of supporting flexibility for kids and family, as well as high quality instruction, as well as making the process manageable for everyone.
Okay, next up, there are two questions that are sort of variations on the same idea. One is specifically asking about the possibility of, extending the school year into the summer, which I presume becomes, a state issue, whether that would even be a possibility, even if we thought it was a good idea. So, that would something would have to change, I presume, for that to occur. And then the other variation on that is, are there going to be things maybe done in terms of work to be given to kids to work on over the summer, again, maybe to help make up for some of the deficiencies that might have happened and to help them prepare for going into next year.
So if I could just say that, yes, the school, any school year or calendar decisions that is coming from the state, the governor's office is making those decisions, and we wait to hear on the closures. And I think in terms of summer, just like we typically do, I mean, we look at the needs of the students. We look at maybe if there are, for some of our special education students, for example, we have extended year. I know there are, we will be looking at our students in need. But I think the assessments, I think when we get to those assessments and start helping the students to see and get that feedback, I think that will give us a lot of information.
I agree. I would also add that after all of this, I think where kids and teachers, all adults, are going to need a summer. The last thing that I really want to do is, after kids have been learning remotely at home all spring, is to then say, in order to be ready for next year, you're going to have to do all this work in the summer. It's certainly worth considering, but I want to be mindful of some of the social emotional issues that we talked about before. And, I think we need to sort of put it in perspective. Every class, every teacher begins the school year with review of the content from the previous class, the previous year, to make sure everyone's on a sound footing. We're doing our best to make sure that before the school year ends, we get our kids to where they need to be. In some cases, it may be necessary to bridge the gap over the summer, but I'm a little wary of that. We've all been kind of traumatized to varying degrees, and kids should still have a summer.
There was a question that I think is really around clarification, because we know that all 5th through 9th graders have been assigned their own Chromebooks. We have been operating basically under the assumption that kids in 10th through 12th generally have their own devices, and I know we did make available devices to any who said, I don't have one, and we did give out some there. So when you speak of kids competing for devices, does that presumably mean kids in K through 4?
Certainly not in 5 through 9. I can't speak for 10 through 12. We know that, typically 10 through 12th graders have access to a device. That doesn't necessarily mean that every kid in the house has their own device. K through 4 as well. Certainly that's a concern. 5 through 9, it's less of a concern in terms of, every 5th through 9th grader should have their own device, assuming, their parent doesn't steal it from them to do their own work or something like that. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. But yeah, I'd say it's primarily a K4 and 10 through 12 problem.
Right, and I just got a note from Paul basically saying that they've already loaned out an additional 100 Chromebooks since this started. So for, I guess, presumably students in that situation who didn't have one for whatever reason, they've already passed out another 100. So I am looking, I am not at this point seeing any other questions. So unless the board has any more, I will thank you very much for the presentation and for the answers. This has been incredibly informative. And again, we really appreciate all the hard work by everyone involved in this. I know you're the voice of Edgemont on this, but we really do appreciate this. But I think at this point we will now go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. Unless Victoria, is there anything else that you want us to?
No, I think it's time to move on to the policy, second reading of the policy.
Oh, sorry, Nilesh had a question. Go ahead. Nilesh, your hand was raised. Did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to say a word, the point that you mentioned. This board meeting, which has been broadcasted on YouTube, and we had so many participants and so many questions, I think is a perfect representation of how much pressure the administration is on in terms of the feedback they've received and the work they've done. And I think nothing speaks better than this small meeting that we're having right now in terms of how much work we are doing. And I just want to appreciate the administration for taking all these questions and patiently answering these questions, and just speaks of the work that the school administration is doing. So thanks to all the administration team and the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilesh.
Okay. Then with that, we will turn it over to Judy to talk about our amended privacy policy.
Okay, hi. So we have updated our personal privacy policy. Today is the second reading. There was an actual change between the first reading and the second reading to basically delete any reference to trying to, how am I going to phrase this? To trying to have a penalty for people who are not enrolled students who might violate the code of conduct, because we don't really have a way to manage that. So we removed that section and simply are putting forth the remainder of the policy so that anybody who is an active participant in distance learning is covered under the personal privacy policy, whether they are on a campus, a trip, or in this case, distance learning.
Okay. Does anyone on the board have any questions or comments on that? Okay, then can I get a motion to approve? Mariquita, do I have a second? Looks like Pamela. All in favor? Looks like we are unanimous, so it is approved. Thank you very much again for taking this on in such a short period of time, because we know it was something that was of concern to the teachers, so we wanted to make sure that we addressed it in a timely fashion. So thank you for that. So that is approved. We now are to the consent up. So I have a couple hands. I'm going to take the hands down. If people actually had questions and that wasn't just left over from the approval, you can put your hands back up. Yes, is that, oh, okay. Sorry, I have flashing hands on my screen. Okay, we are now up to the consent portion of the agenda. So I guess the first question is, does anyone on the board have either any questions about any of the items included, or do they have any items that they'd like to pull out and be taken separately? All right, then, Victoria, I think we can take the consent agenda as one.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the board's approval of G, personnel, number 1, H, students, number 1, I, business, numbers 1 and 2.
Do I have a motion to approve? I see Judy. Do I have a second? Mariquita. All in favor? It is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is scheduled to be on 1 week from tonight, on the 21st, we will be conducting it the same way. I will, as I was looking at the questions that came in, or in some cases didn't come in through the form, I did find a glitch in the form. So my apologies to people who had to go through other methods, but seems like you all managed to figure out other ways to ask. But we will make sure that that glitch is taken care of before the next one, so that you can submit your questions through the form. With that, do we have a Pamela, a motion to adjourn? I see Pamela, second Marquita, all in favor? Unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your participation and for bearing with us as we sort of muddle our way through this. So thank you
Thanks,
again.
Alex. Thank
You're
you.
very welcome.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Right.